start, I want to introduce to you all the organizers of the school. And those are Albert Diaz-Guilera from the University of Barcelona, Marcus Aguiar from Unicamp here in Brazil. This is another state university about 130 kilometers from here. Mario Chavez, where is he? Mario Chavez, he's from France, but originally from Mexico. Klaus Lennertz, who is from the University of Bonn, but will only be here after Friday. I think he's arrived sometime on Friday. And myself, who is the local organizer, but don't ask too many details because I'm sure I don't know them. So anyway, so we welcome a first speaker, who is, Ulrike is the first one. Yep. So Ulrike Feudel from the University of Oldenburg in Germany, and she will start with critical transitions in complex dynamical systems, theory and implication for neurosciences. Okay? Welcome, Ulrike.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, welcome everybody here. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this school. So I will give here 3 lectures. And these 3 lectures are centered more or less around one subject. And this subject is critical transitions. And today I will give you an introduction, so what type of critical transitions I have in mind. So this will be not exhaustive, but so to say gives you an idea so what critical transitions are. In the second lecture, which is tomorrow morning, so I will then extend these concepts to networks and particularly talk about synchronization and desynchronization. And the third one, which is on Monday in the second week, then I will talk about metastability, which is also very closely related to critical transitions. So you see a lot of names here, so I was too lazy to put then all the papers there. So these are all co-authors of mine, so who have contributed to our research, which I will also show, even though this is a student lecture, so you will see that. So therefore I mentioned them in the very beginning, so because many of these figures are taken from publications, so where we actually come to our research. Now, why it's not working here? This is what we didn't try, because it was working before, and can we try it here? Maybe it works here? No. This is now the first glitch. So because we tried it out and it worked, we cannot go forward and backward, even though we tried it and it worked before.
Nothing works.
No. I can take any of those now.
And if you just leave the presentation mode,
Yeah, I can do that, but
not
even that works now.
It's not working?
No, so the forward doesn't work. Change page doesn't work. Aha.
It's just click on the screen.
So here. Okay. No, it's fine. I can do it here. No problem. So, okay. So I have extended a little bit the title, so because I'm not going only to talk about neuroscience here in this first part of the lecture. I will always give examples also from neuroscience, because this is one of the major topics of this school, but I will also give you more general examples for many things, just because to show you that this is a very versatile field, and so you find these kind of phenomena in many other directions as well. So therefore, I start here with critical transitions in nature and in the climate crisis. So these are 4 different examples. What you see here, 2 of them are basically showing data and critical transitions in data. So these are the two lower figures, the two upper figures. So these are critical transitions in modeling. So that means these are models of natural processes. So to give you an example what a critical transition is, so I could use any of those examples. Let's take the one in the upper left corner, so because this is one of the critical transitions which is nowadays often in the news, and so this is about the thermohaline ocean circulation. This is a large-scale circulation which is in the Atlantic Ocean, so it's shown there. So the red arrows basically show you salty, warm water which is transported to the north. There it releases the heat to the atmosphere. It changes the density of the ocean water. The water sinks down and flows back as this blue arrow at the bottom of the ocean. So why this circulation is so important? So because it's very important for the climate in North and Western Europe. And these view graphs here are already from the 90s, and already in the 90s, people have realized that there is a certain threat of a breakdown of this thermohaline ocean circulation, because this is a circulation which brings heat to the north of Western Europe and Northern Europe, because it releases the heat to the atmosphere. This leads to the fact that the average temperature in locations in Europe is about 5 degrees warmer than at the average location, so to say, at the same location on the same latitude in Canada. You see it when you look at the ice cover. So this is the ice cover in the Arctic, and you see that the ice, the margin of the ice is really pushed much more northward than in Canada. And so therefore, if this circulation is not working anymore due to global warming, so this would not mean what many people think, that it becomes warmer in Europe. No, it becomes colder, because in the long run, we will have a climate which is 5 degrees lower in temperature during the year. And so this is now, again, very much in the discussion, because it was believed that this kind of circulation breakdown cannot occur still in this century. There were 2 papers which appeared last year who showed from data so that there is a certain probability that the breakdown can already happen this century, which is, of course, very scary. So another one would be, so to say, changes in biodiversity in a lake, so which is here in shallow lakes. It has also 2 states, like the thermohaline ocean circulation. The circulation is on or it's off. So then the shallow lakes have a vegetation on the bottom of the lake, or it does not. So these are also 2 states, and the other 2 are either dominance changes of different species in the North Sea, or here, so the right one is the deep water convection. This is a part of the thermohaline ocean circulation, which deals with the mixing to the depth, so this has also 2 stable states. Now, when we think about other applications, so this would be one technical application, or one application in society. The technical application is a blackout. Everyone here in the room has for sure experienced the blackout already, so that the electricity goes off for a while. So this is here shown in the US with this large dark spot over there. And the other one is in the society, telling us something about the acceptance of nuclear power, and so which dropped tremendously after the accident in Fukushima. Now people forget, and so the acceptance is increasing again. So there is also something in neuroscience, of course. So these critical transitions, one of them is, which will be extensively discussed here in this school, is the first one. So this is the emergence of epileptic seizures, which is a manifestation of a, say, synchronized state in the brain. So this would be one of the topics which is very much discussed in the second week. But there is another one, for instance, concerning mental health, where also the normal brain functioning and the functioning of a brain in depression is also discussed in terms of this type of bistable systems, where the brain has two stable states. One is in depression and the other one is the normal functioning brain. And transitions between these two states can be also described in terms of these critical transition theories, so which I'm going to discuss here. So this is basically the introduction. So what we should have learned by now in these examples is that what is this critical transition? So because it's a relatively sudden change in the system state as external conditions change, so that means these could be environmental conditions, this could be some forcing, or it could be also some internal state, for instance, in the brain, which is changing, or some signal which is applied to the brain. And all these type of things, so to say, which are related to such transitions from one state to another, a qualitative change, which is relatively sudden, would be called a critical transition, and it's mostly related with some thresholds which appear. So there is some threshold value beyond which a new qualitative state is showing up. There is another theory which is very closely related, which has been developed in ecology, and this is the theory of resilience. And so this also has spread now in many, many disciplines, and there are people, so to say, are thinking about a resilient system as one where the system can react on perturbations in such a way that it either goes back to its original state or maybe another state, but this is also related still with functioning of the system. So critical transitions and resilience are closely related, and I have given you also 3 other names. So because all these theories I'm talking about have been developed in 3 different disciplines, in ecology, in mathematics, and in climate science, and all of them, so to say, use different words for practically almost the same thing. So don't be, so to say, surprised. So these disciplines are far away from each other, so therefore they don't usually read each other's papers. And therefore they came up with the same name or with a different name for the same thing, and we have to deal with this now and try to make a common theory out of it. Now, before I go on, I have a question. So who of you, so because then I can skip some of the slides, is familiar with nonlinear dynamical systems and some bifurcation analysis? So can you raise your hands? So, okay, so most of you, because this is very good, because then I can, I haven't seen all hands, I will very quickly only go over these slides, so because then you can basically pick it up later. But so no, maybe because the majority was showing, so to say, that they know something, so we will not go into this. So into stability theory, and we will continue here. So I only prepared that just in case, so that half of the people have no idea. Okay, so here we start now with one essential thing. So, and this essential thing is multistability. So this is a general concept in nonlinear dynamics, because this concept deals with the fact that a system, a nonlinear system, can have different stable states coexisting for the same parameter values and the same forcing. So what we have seen in all those examples, they had at least 2 stable states which were coexisting, and so the switches could occur just as a transition from one stable state to another stable state, and usually these states are coexisting, and so there are only perturbations which give you from one, or which put you from one state into the other. So this multi-stability is a very common property in nonlinear dynamical systems. So therefore, in most of environmental systems, in most neuronal systems, and in many other applications, this is what you have to deal with. And so there is another concept which is also shown already there, is that we can, in principle, so to say, describe it as such a stability landscape as you showed, as it is shown here. So we have a kind of landscape. And so the stable states are the states which are in the valleys. And there are unstable states like the red ball on the top. So they are basically on the boundaries of these states. And that means it depends crucially on the initial condition which of these states you will reach in the long-term limit. So they are coexisting, all these, and this could be more than that. So this is just by stability what I have shown. But there are lots of examples where you have multi-stability, many states coexisting. And then, so to say, you have many blue balls. And then it depends crucially on the initial condition, which one is realized by your system, depending on where you start. Because you can think of putting your ball somewhere in this landscape, and then you will roll down, so to say, into the valley, and then these are the states you will reach. But there is the notion of a basin of attraction, and that means this is all the set of initial conditions which all would go to the same state. This is where you go. And so this multi-stability, here is again an example, so to say, from ecology, where you have different coexisting species, or you have different patterns of species, if you think about vegetation patterns. In neuroscience, you would think about different firing patterns, for instance. So as those who can coexist for given initial conditions. Now, so when we think about measures of resilience, so what do we do? So what we usually do is nicely shown here in this figure, which is basically in the formulation of Holling, who was the one who has introduced this notion of resilience. And so he said that the perturbations should be diminished, so when a system is resilient and you go back to your original state. In mathematical terms, this is nothing else than linear stability analysis. So because what you do is you put a perturbation for the state you are considering. So we have, again, a bistable situation. And then you see there are these two valleys. And then you say so that the left one has a high resilience because it has a deep valley and a huge basin of attraction, while this is not the case when you have low resilience. And your resilience, so to say, or your stability is basically dependent on how fast you get back after a perturbation. So how fast the ball rolls down, and this, of course, also depends on your stability landscape. In mathematical terms, you end up with eigenvalues, and so your eigenvalues have to be negative so that your perturbation is damped out because it goes with e to the power, the eigenvalue times t, or the real part of the eigenvalue times t. And so therefore, this is linear stability analysis. Now, when we think about perturbations, then we should not think only about a perturbation where we take our ball, we let it roll, that's it. No. So perturbations can be of very different kinds, and this is why we have these different mechanisms how critical transitions can occur. And so these three different perturbations I'm going to discuss. So there are fluctuations which are acting on your system. There are shocks. That means there's one large perturbation which disturbs your system. And then there are trends. That means you have a time evolution of certain influences like the forcing, like internal parameters. They change with time. And so these are trends. And there is another column you see, so there is a time scale. We are also going to discuss very much time scales here in these three lectures, because so the time scales play a very important role in critical transitions. And you see, so sometimes, so the trends, for instance, can be fast or slow, or it can be an arbitrary time dependence, but then you have a fast time scale for shock, because this is something which happens fast, and then it goes back to normal. But the timing when this perturbation happens is, of course, very relevant. And then for fluctuations, you have certain statistical properties. The system responds in different ways. It can tolerate the perturbation, it can adapt, or it can transform the whole behavior of the system. And then, so to say, leading to very different responses and very different critical transitions. Now, when we think about so this stability landscape, which we have learned about, so we can translate the whole thing also in a mathematical diagram in such a way so that we have our bistable region over there, so where both states are possible. And when we are now looking at the state of the system, so which would be the state variable z, for instance, with respect to the forcing, so then we see that there are different solutions. So there are multiple stable solutions in the bistable region, and outside the bistable region, we would have only one solution. So there is this relationship, this close relationship between the picture where we look at potentials or stability landscapes and the picture where this type of hysteresis comes into play. And we have also to deal with another difficulty in complexity, so to say, and these are basins of attraction. I already said what a basin of attraction is, so this is the set of initial conditions which all converge to the same stable state. And so we have seen in this very simple picture, so we had just the stability landscape, and then our boundary was exactly 1 point, so it was the maximum of the whole stability landscape, left and right, so to say. So left and right, we had basically the basin of attraction of the different states. So this is the simple case, and this is the case on the left side, because basins of attraction can have a different structure. So one of them is, the simple one is that we have smooth basins of attraction. So the boundaries are smooth. So these are just curves, or these are just subsurfaces in your state space, but they are real surfaces. So that means all what is colored here, so this is just the two populations in two different habitats which are migrating and have a connection due to this migration between the habitats. And if we have, so to say, a weak nonlinearity, then we have smooth basins of attraction. If we don't, we can have fractal basins of attraction. And those are very vulnerable, because now you see there are open sets still in the same color around the attractors, which are the stars. So there are the stars, remember where they are, here, and then you find them here as well, but you see only a very small region around them, so where all the initial conditions converge to them. But outside, it's a mess. And this mess is really, so to say, very difficult to handle, because now the system becomes very vulnerable to perturbations, because if you kick out the system, so to say, with a perturbation out of this open neighborhood, you have no idea where does it go, because the predictability gets completely lost, and you have no idea what state is going to be there in the long-term limit. So this is the plan, basically, for this part of the course here, so that we now look at the role of perturbations. The three I have taken into account here. And so we will discuss everything in terms of this type of stability landscape, which I can either represent with the real potential wells, or the stability landscape, or I can also represent it as a hysteresis, but not all systems, and this is something I realize in the literature, that almost everyone in the literature is considering only this type of hysteresis behavior and think that this is the only transition. Okay, it's a very important transition, no question, but critical transitions is a lot more. And most people stick to this hysteresis situation, but this is only half of the truth. There are lots of other situations, and I'm going to discuss some of them, so where this is not a hysteresis. And I will show you what is the importance about this also. Okay, so these are the 4 different, also called tipping mechanisms, which I'm going to discuss. So there are more on the market. So this is what I have to say from the very beginning. But so I will only restrict myself in the first lecture to those. We will discuss more complex behavior in the next lectures later on. But for today, we are talking about bifurcation-induced transitions, noise-induced transitions, where we have fluctuations as the perturbations, then shock tipping or tipping, which happens because there is a single shock acting on a system. This could be an extreme event, so which could lead, so to say, to jump over the basin boundary. And we will discuss rate-induced tipping, so that means these are systems which have parameters which follow an underlying trend, and it depends on the speed of this trend, how fast you change your forcing, or how fast you change your parameters or your input, and then transitions can occur depending on the speed. This is something which is in ordinary differential equations, which are autonomous, which is not possible there. But so when you have this generalization where your forcing can be arbitrary, this is what comes out. Okay, so now let us start with bifurcations. And what happens here is something which is very well known for a very long time. And so an abrupt transition happens whenever you have a bifurcation popping up. So that means if we look at this hysteresis again, so then you see that we are having stable branches. These are the full lines, and the dashed line is the unstable branch connecting the two. And then there is this saddle node bifurcation. And then the system, if you very slowly go to this kind of cliff, then at some point you will fall down, because there is no stable solution anymore. So in this corner, and so therefore, so the system will tip, and it has crossed a bifurcation. So a possible realization of this, they are manifold, of course. So it can be temperature changes in the environment. So like for thermosensitive neurons, for instance, you change temperatures, or in food webs in ecosystems. But you can also change the forcing, like an input signal for a neuron, or you change the rainfall for a vegetation pattern. The important point, and here we come already for the first time to the discussion of timescales, the important point is to remember how these bifurcation diagrams are computed. Because what you do is you wait, in principle, infinitely long until you reach your stable state. So you wait until your ball is basically reaching the bottom of the well. So it's a very, very slow trend. So you are moving very slowly along the stable branch before you end up at the cliff where you can fall down. So that means the time scale of your forcing, your environmental change, or whatever is changing in your system is very slow compared to the internal time scale of the system. These two have to be always looked at in conjunction, and you have to compare them. And this is also something which in the literature is rather seldom addressed. So, but this is how, in principle, such bifurcation diagrams are calculated, and one has to take it in mind, particularly when we look at trends, because trends can be, of course, also rather fast. So, bifurcations which are considered as critical is also something where people, so to say, in the community debate which ones are critical and which ones are not. And so, because what I think is very important is the first thing we have to think about is it reversible or is it irreversible? So what does it mean? So when I change my system, I'm changing my parameter, and there is a qualitative change happening. So there is a critical transition popping up. It can be reversible, and reversible means that if I return, so to say, or reverse my trend, and I go back where I came from, I should end up with the same state as I came from. So I can remove, basically, my critical transition. If it is irreversible, then I cannot. So the simplest bifurcations, which are the saddle node bifurcation, the transcritical, the pitchfork, this is all for steady states, and the half bifurcation, most of them are reversible. So that means in terms of this classification, reversible or irreversible, only the saddle node bifurcation would be the one which is left, basically. So this would be the only one which is in the narrow sense of the notion of critical transitions would be a critical transition, the other not. The others are reversible because I can go back and forth and finally end up with the same state. But it's not that simple, I think. So because there are many applications where you have transitions which are reversible, so in a certain sense, and they would not call as critical transitions in the mathematical literature, but they are for the field. And this is something to think about. So for instance, in an ecological system, the transcritical bifurcation is one of the most important ones. So because it describes the situation when an animal, for instance, can invade an ecosystem. So this could be a predator, so when it's 0, so on the left side, it's not there, and then it can invade the system. Or when we go reverse, then the predator would die out. This is a crucial change for the ecosystem. If there is a higher trophic level, yes or no, this is for an ecosystem really a deadly decision. And even though for mathematicians, this would not call a critical transition. This has to be thought over, I think, in the future. So because it's also, what is critical is context dependent. And this is something, so to say, which we cannot only decide in mathematics. But mathematics, of course, helps a lot. Now, when we think about this figure, which we have discussed already at length, so this hysteresis behavior, then it is only in principle irreversible. So because you go down, so to say, from the upper branch, you fall down at the saddle node bifurcation, but then you have to remove the courses of your critical transition quite far until you meet basically the second saddle node bifurcation where you can jump up again. But this situation doesn't have to be there. So it's a very, ideal situation to have such a hysteresis behavior, because it could also be that the second branch, which is the lower branch, doesn't have a connection, and the second saddle node bifurcation is not there. And I know many systems where this is the case. And then this hysteresis behavior would not take place. So let me come to examples for bifurcation tipping. So this is one again from climate. So this is, again, the global ocean circulation, which we discussed in the very beginning. So this is now a model, or better, 2 models. One is a simplified conceptual model to the right. The left one is a real ocean circulation model, so which is spatial and it's high dimensional and so on. And here we have a classical case of a bifurcation tipping, because as it is a density-driven circulation, so the density is dependent in the ocean on temperature and on salt content. And the salt content is more important than the temperature, and therefore the freshwater input, which would change the density, is the most important bifurcation parameter. And if we increase this freshwater input, then we would reach an instability, so where we will fall down, so to say, we have a breakdown of our circulation, and then, so to say, as I said, the thermohalation circulation is off, and basically there's no heat transfer to the north anymore. In a more sophisticated model, you see, so there are several branches coexisting. So we have multi-stability there. And some of these branches are still, say, okay-ish in terms of the strength of the overturning. Some of them are, say, medium. And so then the bottom one there is, of course, the off state. So this would be a typical case of bifurcation tipping in the ocean, but we would also have these type of things in neuroscience. So bifurcations are there all over the place, and I would like to draw to your attention here a bifurcation which was not on the previous slide. Neuroscience usually is a bit more complicated than, so to say, the simple physical systems. So because in neuroscience, what you do is that so you look at bifurcations in a slightly different way. And this slightly different way I would like to introduce because we are going to use this later on. So these are basically results on analyzing the crayfish, which is the creature which you see in the bottom left. Not bottom, so the upper left. And then there was an experiment there, so where they saw interspike intervals, and this is what is measured basically. So the timing between different spikes. And they saw an abrupt increase of this timing. So you can do this by analyzing the data, so which would be the spike recordings over there. So this would be the spike train. And now bifurcation diagrams in neuroscience are usually shown in a very different form, because they don't use usually a state variable, because as state variables in the neuroscience model, you would have the gating variables, so which control the ion channels, or you have the membrane potential. But what is often used is the timing. So what is the time between subsequent spikes? And so the bifurcation is shown in these terms. So we see the usual bifurcation diagram, which we know from a root to chaos, for instance, on the left here, but in terms of timing. So we have a periodic solution which has a timing, then a period doubling cascade. We have chaos with periodic windows. But then we have something very interesting. So these are the classical bifurcations, which I have counted now. But then comes a non-classical one, which is very important in neuroscience, because this is a homoclinic bifurcation. A homoclinic bifurcation is not a simple bifurcation as the ones we had on the previous slide, because the ones on the previous slide you can really get with eigenvalues. So you can analyze the stability. But here, so there are two invariant sets which are interacting. Because in this case, so to say, a limit cycle meets a stationary solution. They collide with each other. It's a collision of two sets. And it can be even very complicated, this collision, as here, because the eigenvalues of the limit cycle are also conjugate complex. So therefore, you see a very complex structure. But what is important about this is basically that in the consequence, what this homoclinic bifurcation is doing, and therefore I would say it counts as a critical transition. So because it goes from, this is the same bifurcation diagram, but now the temperature, which is the bifurcation parameter here, because it's a thermosensitive neuron. So it goes much further. And so now we see when we go back here, so it ended with 12.5 degrees, and we saw the nice period doubling cascade on the left side. But what we see on the right side is a period adding cascade, which comes from the other side. And in the middle is this homoclinic bifurcation. And on the left side, you have the system in tonic firing. So that means it's really spiking. But on the right side, you have it in bursting mode. And this transition from tonic firing to bursting would be one important critical transformation or a critical transition in neurons. Physiologically, what does it mean? It's completely unclear, because what happens is the return time, so that means the interspike interval, goes to infinity. and that means this neuron is blocked. Why? So, no idea. And but it corresponds to a blocking of the neuron, whatever this is good for. Okay, let me come to the second transition, and this is the critical transition due to noise. And so what we have when we have different stable states, so the noise will kick you out, because each of your states will become metastable, so because the noise will always kick you out. And then you start hopping between different stable states. You stay in a while in the neighborhood of a stable state, then you hop to another one, and so on in a multi-stable system. So you are jumping over this boundary in the middle. If we think about this again in terms of this hysteresis, so you are jumping over this dashed line. So this is what you do. But then your eigenvalues don't help you much. You need another stability measure. And what do you do is basically, so you look at this jumping process, and then you look at the mean time, which is needed for the system to stay in one well. So because you will be kicked out anyway, but so you are interested in what is the mean time to stay in one stable state. And so what you do is very simple. So you measure the time length of each of these intervals where you are close to one of the states you are interested in. You take the mean value, and this mean value scales so with the exponential function, where in the nominator there is the potential height, because you have to go over this hill. You have to jump over. So this is, of course, very important. And in the denominator, so we have the noise strength. So the larger the noise strength, of course, the smaller is your mean value of the residence time, because you are kicked out much easier. And the larger the potential height you have to jump over, so then this is basically also in the exponential function. And the larger this height, the longer you stay, because it takes quite a while to get such a perturbation. Okay, so in this deep convection, so we can ask this question also, because this is also a process which is dependent on atmospheric conditions, whether heat is released or is not released to the atmosphere. So it's a bistable system as well. And it's again influenced by temperature and by salinity. And so the system has two states. Either there is a convection process which gives heat to the atmosphere and mixes down to the bottom, or there is no. And so one can show, so to say, that observational data in certain areas in the Labrador Sea, and these are the first ones to break down in the circulation, so then you see that the probability distribution of what are convective and non-convective years, the non-convectives are the red ones, so the green ones are the convective years. You see that this formation of deep water, which drives more or less this circulation overall, so is less probable, becomes less and less probable. And when we look at the mean residence times with increasing temperature, that means with global warming, so then the years where it is convective go more or less to zero, and the non-convective years will dominate, and then this is a weakening of this thermohaline ocean circulation. So now let me come to noise-induced transitions in neurons. They are also there, of course, but here, so they are between different firing patterns. So the left view graphs show you that there is an overlap you see in the bifurcation diagram for different bursting behavior. So you see there is a cycle where you have 3 spikes in the burst and 2 spikes in the burst. So they are overlapping, but there is another parameter range where the 4 cycles, so that means the 4 spikes in the burst and the 3 spikes in the burst overlap. And all these type of transitions you can find of course, in the Hindmarsh-Rose system, but also in two coupled Fitzhugh-Nagumo neurons. So you see this jumping process on the left side, which we have seen, and on the right side you see the jumping between two different states, so the formation of spikes and the formation of low amplitude oscillations. So there is also this type of hopping behavior, but the same methods which I have just outlined, you can use in neuroscience as well. So everything you can apply here and to analyze these type of conditions. But in neuroscience, again, it's a little bit more complicated because there you have really to look at the hopping process between patterns, so firing patterns. So this makes it a little bit more cumbersome, say, the analysis, but everything works nicely. There is one thing I would like to point out here. And so how does it happen when we hop? So in a simple case where we have no fractal boundaries, so simple boundaries, what would happen is you hop over the saddle point. So this is the slowest, so the lowest point, so to say, in your stability landscape where you can get over in higher dimensions. So of course not in a one-dimensional case as we have seen. Here you would see a highly multistable system. So this would be the potential to the left, but to the right you see it, so to say, with lines of equal height. So you see this is a quite complicated landscape. But again, when we come to neuroscience, there is an additional complication we have to take into account. And this is what we would like to try in the hands-on session. So because in neuroscience, our systems are usually not like most of the systems, so in other fields, that they all have more or less comparable timescales. In neuroscience, it's very pronounced that one of the variables is very fast. This is the potential and the electric potential of the neuron. The others are slow. So the ion channels are slow. That means you have a pronounced timescale separation between slow and fast dynamics. And this makes critical transitions much more complicated. Because then, in this case, in a slow-fast system, so you would not go over the saddle point. And this is what we hopefully can try out in the hands-on session, that we understand why we are not going over the saddle point, why neurons are a bit special in all these kind of things. This is what we would like to understand. So now we look again at Holling. So who formulated in 1973, so to say, what is today called engineering resilience. So this was basically linear stability analysis. But he also came up later, almost 20 years later, so he came up with another idea, so that this is ecological resilience. And he said that this is the stability with respect to large perturbations, and the smallest perturbation which is necessary to leave the current ecosystem state. So this is what the resilience is. And when we translate it into mathematical terms, so what does it mean? It means, so one has to compute the smallest distance to the basin boundary, because you have to jump out of the basin boundary, so out of your basin of attraction, and then you can go to another system. So for low-dimensional systems, this is simple. So there are methods available. For high-dimensional systems, it's a real problem because you cannot probe all the directions in a high-dimensional system. So because what you have to do is, in terms of the smooth basins, so you need, so to say, this vector which points to the closest place, and here also, but then it's the open neighborhood what you have to take into account, because all this fractal stuff which is outside doesn't count, because only when you go out of this region where all the initial conditions go to the same point, so then this is what you can get. Okay, so, but what is for high-dimensional systems? Low-dimensional, we can see it even here, but for high-dimensional systems, you have to do it. And this is related to a critical transition which is called the shock perturbation or extreme event perturbation. And this is a corresponding transition. So you have only a single perturbation. You kick the system in once out of the basin of attraction. When we come back to our view graph here, so we have to find a perturbation which just gets us over the boundary. So this is what we have to do, but now in a high-dimensional system. And this is not so simple. Here we have an example, again from ecology, because there is no such thing in neuroscience so far. So here we have a plant pollinator network. So everybody of you knows pollinators, which are pollinate plants. And these are usually networked systems, so you have bipartite networks, so where to each plant belong several pollinators and vice versa. So it's a complicated network in general. And what we have to compute is basically what we call the minimal fatal shock. So because when you apply this shock, then some of the species get lost, because we are interested in the state where all the plants and pollinators coexist. This would be the desired state. And we want to ask, what is the perturbation which brings us out and we lose species? Because the loss of pollinators is one of the biggest threats, so to say, in ecosystems research nowadays. But of course, so these networks, they comprise something like 250 species. Okay, forget about looking into all the directions. This is impossible. What you have to do is you have to optimize your search, because otherwise you will never get to any solution. And indeed, you can do that. And you can look at this like people looked at this in hydrodynamics when they look at the transition from a laminar to a turbulent flow, which is a completely different topic. But the ideas which they have is the same. So what is the perturbation? You need the minimal perturbation to go from a laminar flow to a turbulent flow. And this optimization method is applicable here as well, and gives you the following result. So this is this is the most vulnerable network of, if I remember right, we studied 50-something networks out of, so to say, a table which is on the internet. People have collected these type of interactions in different parts of the world. And so what comes out, this is the most vulnerable one. And this is the realization of this perturbation. So what we see is basically, so in color, we see the amount of perturbation to each of the species, and also the direction. And so then, because now we have a vector to compute, the vector which has a magnitude and it has a direction. And this is what you get. And this is the most vulnerable one. And so you see that some of the species die out after applying this perturbation. So here we see now, so to say, different networks from this table. So this is the web of life for somebody who is interested in. So where we took these networks from. And you see these networks are highly complicated. And what you see are the perturbations you need to destabilize them. So they are ordered, these networks we have ordered according to the magnitude of their perturbation. And all what has this underlying yellow part, so is what you lose, finally, in the course of the perturbation. These are the species you lose. And then you see immediately that specialization is bad, because everyone, not everyone, but many species have only one partner. To be specialized on one partner, something not desirable. So because this is most dangerous. But there are also these kind of tree-like structures which have a very loose connection to the rest of the core, are very dangerous. In neuroscience, we don't have that. But I found a very interesting paper, which I would be very happy to discuss with people in neuroscience, because it's not really my field. So I'm working in this as somebody who works in applications there, but it's not my main subject of research. But so people have formulated also the beginning of epileptic seizures in such a way that there are brain states, so where these basins of attraction are changing, so to say, their location. So in the normal brain, so your epileptic state would be the little one within this dashed line. So, and therefore, so from the big one, you need already a large perturbation to get there, but in the epileptic brain, so to say, this kind of configuration has changed and the boundary has moved. And it comes much closer to the normal state, which is this outer trajectory there. And then they claim, I have to say, so because so they did not really show the model, which I found a little bit strange. But they claim that then a single perturbation is only needed to get you into the epileptic brain state. Okay, so this is something where people at least think about in these directions in neuroscience, but not yet. So the last transition I would like to talk about is a possible critical transition due to a rate-induced tipping. What does it mean? I said that already in the very beginning, so that this is a true non-autonomous dynamics case, because we are considering now trends as a perturbation which obey a certain time evolution. So our parameters change with an arbitrary time dependence, and their time scale is not far away from what the internal time scale of the system is. That means we have to consider two time scales: the rate of the external parameter change and the rate which brings you back to the attractor. So this is the dissipative time scale. So these two are interacting with each other. So you have a fast trend. And this fast trend, so to say, gives you the outcome of the critical transitions, because this is the only critical transition so far which does not need to have bistability. So before we had always two different states and we were jumping between them. Here you don't need this, which is, I think, an advantage, because not all the systems which are around us in nature have multistability. And we will see that also so how this transition can take place has different forms. And so these are also quite versatile, leaving us with different outcomes. So let me give you 3 examples, now again from neuroscience and again from ecology. But you will see in the last example it's very close to neuroscience. And so this is another subject I would like to do in the hands-on school, whether we can transfer it into neuroscience. So let's look first at our first example. We have a bistable system. So this is a budworm, so the spruce budworm, who has a very simple growth characteristic. So it has a so-called Ali effect. That means the population has to be larger than a critical density. So just to see this transition, so to say, to a stable population. If you are below the critical population density in the very beginning, you die out as a species. So these are the 2 stable states. You either go to the carrying capacity, so which is determined by your environmental conditions, or you die out. So these are the red and the blue trajectories. So you see them here. The blue ones would go to the carrying capacity, so you have a nice population density. The red ones go to extinction. Now we start changing the environment in such a way that this critical population density is affected for a while, and then it becomes constant. And what happens is that due to the different time scales so which are now active. So we have a time scale, so how our parameter is changing, and we have a time scale how our quasi-stationary states, in this case particularly the saddle point, which is the Bayesian boundary, is moving with this time dependence. And then we see the outcome. So we are now moving our critical population density, and then you see many of the blue trajectories which would have converged to the carrying capacity are now going to extinction. So that means moving the boundary of the basin of attraction has tremendous consequences, because now trajectories which would have moved to the full vegetation state or to the full population dynamical state will die out. And that means here something happens which cannot happen in an autonomous system, because the trajectory crosses the Bayesian boundary. In an autonomous system, this cannot happen. But in a non-autonomous system, this can happen, and it depends on how fast you move, basically, your boundary. Okay, let's have a look at another example. And so this is a predator-prey system, and it has only one stable state, at least in the parameter range which we consider here, and where predator and prey can coexist. And now we destroy basically the habitat of the prey. So we are saying, okay, so we are destroying it by climate change, by land use change. There are lots of possibilities how I can destroy habitats. And the outcome is the following. If I do it slowly, then the prey can somehow follow these changes and can survive. But if I do it too fast, then we see that the prey population drops down to very low population densities, which would, in fact, be below the extinction threshold, so that other perturbations would lead to extinction. And this would be, so the outcome that, in principle, our population, our prey population, would die out. And this is what we see. And there is no alternative state here. There's only deviation from there is a deviation from the original state, which makes it possible to reach areas in state space which are dangerous. And this area is the extinction threshold. If my trajectory gets there, so then the prey can die out, and we have a collapse of our ecological system. So how can we get to this analysis? So now we do some theoretical considerations how we can understand what is going on, because we want to understand how can it be that the speed of a change is relevant, and how does it basically changes the whole dynamics. And now we come to the point where we have to discuss timescale separations. Because in ecological systems, and this is the same in same as in neurosystems, there is a natural timescale separation, because in any ecological system, so you have a hierarchy of different trophic levels, and usually the bottom trophic levels are very fast in their turnover times, so in their lifetimes, and the ones which are basically on the top, so to say, the top predators are very slow. And so this is something which is naturally given, and so therefore we have systems which we can write in the following form. So this is just the predator and the prey. The predator is the lower trophic, the prey is the lower trophic level, the predator is the higher trophic level. So the prey is the fast variable, and the predator is the slow variable. And you see, so they have both, so to say, they follow a certain dynamics, which is coupled by predation terms. But the important thing I would like to point out is there is this kind of kappa. So this kappa shows up in front of the equation for the prey, indicating that this is the fast variable, and this kappa is very smaller than 1. So now we can have 2 time scales. So this is what we see there is the slow time. No, sorry, this is the fast time. We go to the slow time on the next slide. So if we would look at, so to say, the trajectory in the state space, so then we see that there are parts of the dynamics which is very fast, indicated by the 2 arrows, and there are slow parts of the dynamics which are indicated by only 1 arrow. And now we would like to understand the whole dynamics in terms of this slow-fast dynamics and look at the limit where this timescale separation becomes ideal. And this gives us the following. So now we look at the fast layer system. The fast layer system means that we set kappa to 0. We now go to the, so the previous one was in the slow time, now we go to the fast time. So we set kappa to 0 and we make the coordinate transformation in such a way that, so to say, the kappa which was in front of du dt would now be in front of g. And now we apply the perfect timescale separation. And then, so to say, the predator is basically constant. So because it's slow, it cannot so to say, cannot react really on the fast timescale as the prey does. And that means we would get the dynamics of these fast parts of the trajectory. So this is what we get with a differential equation which is there. So we have, in principle, only the prey dynamics. The predator is basically constant. And that means our state space is for each value, it's one-dimensional, for each value of the predator, so we see one state space. And we see the arrows, and we see, so to say, that some points here on this gray curve, so these are the fixed points of the dynamics, because we see that the trajectories come from left and right and meet on this curve. So these are basically fixed points of this fast layered system. We can also do the other thing. So we go to the slow, reduced system. And there we take, again, the slow time now, and again set kappa to 0. So, but then we see that the first, so the prey, is adapting instantaneously. And the only dynamics which is left is the predator, because this guy is slow. But, so then the dynamics happens only on this manifold, which is given by this nonlinear equation f equals 0. So this is some manifold in state space on which the whole dynamics takes place. And this is the so-called critical manifold. So these are the slow parts of the dynamics. And now I have plotted here also in green the null clients of the system. And then we see that this is here on the slow, so that we have the slow parts here and there. And so now we have the critical manifold, and we see from the fast dynamics, from the layered system, we see the stability. So we have stable branches of the critical manifold, and we have unstable branches. Ah, yeah, this is good. Thank you. Yeah. So these are here the stable branches in red, and the blue ones are the unstable branches of the critical manifold. So the stable branches attract the trajectory. It goes right here, stays here for a while on this slow part here, and then when it comes here, so it is ejected and goes again to the other part of the stable manifold. So this is how the trajectory looks like. And now we can understand what's going on in our system. So now we use this. Now we compute our critical manifolds. These are the red and the blue guys here. And this would be a rate of change where we have a small rate of change. So this would be the stable fixed point, so which would move quasi-stationary with the time evolution of our parameter, and this would be the trajectory. And we say that this trajectory tracks when it stays in the neighborhood of this thing. So, and we see this is the case. That means the prey abundance can follow how the equilibrium quasi-stationary would change. But when we make the rate faster, so then the trajectory is just ejected here and is going to very low densities, because this is the null line, which is, so to say, at the 0 level. And it comes very close so that it gets extinct due to other reasons, and then it would go back, but this is only mathematically. In nature, it would never happen. So that means we see for a slow rate, this is, so to say, tracking. For a fast rate, this is not tracking. It's going to extinction. Now, this is what we see here, always the same initial condition. So, and there is a rate, and there should be a critical rate where it turns from being tracking to being tipping. So, because this is the same initial condition which we have taken. Okay, can we get a handle on that? The critical speed. Yes, we can. So, because we look at our slow-fast system here, so this is where the timescale separation is not perfect. So, therefore, the trajectory can go here and goes around here. But this would be the perfect timescale separation. And now the trajectory, when it meets the fold point here, so where the stable and the unstable manifold, critical manifold come together. So then we can analyze the dynamics here, and we see that there is a singularity here. Because, so this is the critical manifold, this is the slow dynamics of the predator, and then we derive the dynamics of the fast variable on the slow manifold. So we have to take the derivatives of this thing here, so so the total derivative here to get out this dynamics. So we don't want to do it now, but we see that there is a function here which has a numerator and a denominator. In the denominator, there is this turns out to be the fold condition. So the condition when there is this point where the blue and the red come together. And this is 0. That means here our speed for the prey becomes infinity, because the 0 is now in the denominator. So that means this becomes infinity, and so therefore our trajectory would go off very fast. But there is one trajectory which does not do it. And so when we look at this dynamics, we have to make also the nominator 0. And then we find one trajectory which has a finite speed, not an infinite speed, at the fold point, and this trajectory goes over here. And this is a singular Carnot trajectory, and this is exactly the trajectory which separates the trajectories which are tracking from the ones which are tipping. So this would be the situation when we have a perfect timescale separation, so we can compute this Carnot for this situation and extend it to where we are not in the perfect timescale separation. Then these critical manifolds are a little bit tilted, but the result is the same. So we can find this Carnot trajectory, and this is like a kind of basin boundary, the basin boundary between tracking and tipping trajectories. And this is what we get. So that means so that we have now this boundary, and this boundary, if we have different initial conditions and we change the rate, this boundary depends on the rate. And so with a certain rate, this boundary is moving, and then, so to say, as it is moving, then it would cross also this initial condition, and then this one would go from tipping to trapping, trapping to tipping. So, okay, so that means all the thing is very much dependent on the initial condition. And for all the critical transitions we have discussed so far, This is not the case. So because there are these critical transitions, so to say, apply to the stationary solutions, to the periodic solutions, but then there is always a base and boundary in between, so to say, or so to say, associated with it. Here, there is a critical value of the parameter, which is different for each initial condition. This makes this transition quite unique. But you can also get another one, so to say it's another ecosystem dynamics, which is used usually to describe harmful algae blooms. And this is an excitable system, and you can get, instead of a collapse of the system, you can get a blooming behavior. That means you can get a high concentration of your algae concentration, and this looks, as you see, pretty much like what a Fitsuk-Nagumo is doing. And so this gives us another outcome, so it leads to an outbreak of one population, and not on the collapse. We can do this whole analysis once again. I don't want to go through this once again, but in principle, so to say, you see the same things. So once you have a tracking trajectory, here you have a tipping trajectory, which makes a bloom and goes over these critical manifolds. So we don't want to return to this analysis here, because, so this is all the same as you see. But what is important to see is this thing. So because now, when you had this excitation here, which is, so to say, triggered by just moving one of the parameters, so then it depends on whether you have another excitation, whether you end up in a region where you are still in the range where another excitation is possible, or you are not. So that means with moving your parameters, you stop this type of excitations only when you come into a region, or you land in a region in state space where you don't have, so to say, so this possible tipping once again. So then the system is tracking, and then there will be no further spike. That means you can, in principle, explain your spiking behavior in a neuron, and now we are coming to the neurons here, also as a rate-induced transition. So because when we look at the two, so this was a harmful algae bloom model. So this is very complex, as we see. This is the Fitsuk-Nagumo model, so which has essentially the same shape. So these are the null-clines. The blue one is basically identical for both, but so the null-cline of the Y, so to say, here is the red line, and the one of the Z is the green line here, but this is the only difference, basically. So there are certain more fixed points for the plankton model, but for the excitability, it's the same. And therefore, so to say, and this will be something what we would like to try in the hands-on session, whether we can come up with an idea how to explain spiking as a rate-induced transition, because this is what I think is doable. Okay, this is the last point for wrapping up, so to say, rate-induced transitions. Now we come to the fact that we look at a highly multistable system. So a highly multistable system has lots of attractors coexisting, and some of them can be even chaotic. So because for the moment, chaos was not playing any role so far in this critical transition business, but now it comes into play. And now we have, so to say, lots of attractors in the system, and some of them are even chaotic. And so when we look into the literature, what people do when they look at the dynamics of multistable system and change one parameter, so they do the quasi-static approach. That means we are thinking about sweeping through a bifurcation diagram and go over all the transitions which we would have jumping from one stable solution to the other. So I will convince you this is not what we are going to see. in certain cases, because now we ask what happens when the rate of the driver becomes comparable with the dissipative timescale. Because we had sweeping through the bifurcation diagram, this should be on a very small timescale, very slow, but it could be fast. And now we look what it is. Because what we have is basically, this is the traversing state. We have these two timescales, so we are moving in that direction to some bifurcation, and we have the intrinsic dissipative timescale. Both are working together. And when we have a fast trend now, we see completely different stuff if we would be on the slow trend. And let's have a look. And we look now, we will now skip this. So where it comes from, we go here. So we take a pendulum as an example. So this is also very simple. This is the bifurcation diagram. So it has, so the pendulum is forced here. So with a periodic forcing, then we have basically here our bifurcation diagram. There is here a chaotic attractor. It's shown here. So this is an extended chaotic attractor. It's shown here in the Poincaré section. I hope everybody knows what the Poincaré section is. So maybe not. So what you do is that if you have a periodically forced system, so you make a stroboscopic mapping. So you take basically, you look at the system always at the same phase of your forcing here, and then you plot one point. So that means you take a surface in state space and you look when the trajectory hits. So, and what we want to do is we start here with this chaotic attractor, and then we move through the bifurcation diagram from here to here with a certain rate. So we are changing what is this C here exponentially. So we switch off our driving. The end of the whole procedure should be the pendulum is at rest. So because if there is no driving, then there cannot be any complex dynamics anymore. So let's see what's happened. And we take, this is what I should still mention. So to say the red line here is the dissipative timescale. So, and we take a rate which is slightly slower and a rate which is slightly higher. So, but not much. So we are in the same order of magnitude. So now you see on the left side, you see, so to say, what is the current value of the forcing parameter. So with a slower and with a faster rate. And here you see an attractor, so to say, which you would see in the Poincaré section at that time instant when we have, so to say, this C value. And what you see is a chaotic attractor. Okay, so no wonder, because we have started there. We go further and further and further. Now we are close to 0. Okay, so, and we see here there is still a large variability. So when the rate is quite fast, when the rate is a little slower than the rate of the dissipative timescale, so to say, then we see our pendulum is swinging, but we see that our forcing is almost 0. Oh, there was something in between, and we haven't seen anything of this. And this is what we now compare. So because now we are here again, so to say, in this picture, and now we see where we are in the bifurcation diagram and what we would see when we are sweeping through the bifurcation diagram. This is what we should see. Some periodic solutions, the red one, the green one, and here the blue one, they are plotted on top here. And what we see is that the attractor which we see in our time evolution is far away from what the bifurcation diagram is showing us. So this has nothing to do with this, basically, what we see. So therefore, the dynamics now is not reflected. Okay, so why? So what do we see instead? So this is another point here. And now we look at the basins of attraction. Here on this value, where we have two periodic orbits here. And we look at their basins of attraction, and then we see that there is a fractal basin of attraction here. And the fractal basin of attraction is related to the fact that there is a chaotic saddle embedded in this boundary. We will discuss this tomorrow morning once again, so to say, to make this a little bit more clear. So this would be this chaotic saddle, and as a saddle, like a saddle point, which has stable and unstable direction. So if you have a saddle point, then it has stable directions and unstable directions. The same happens to a chaotic set. It has also stable and unstable directions, which is called sometimes filamentations. This would be the unstable one, and we plot this now on top. And we see they are not equal, but they are pretty close. So they are pretty close, which gives us, so to say, the idea. So what we see is not what the bifurcation diagram is showing us, but it's the unstable solution which is embedded here in the basin boundaries. And this is moving, and this is what we see. Yeah, and so when we plot our bifurcation diagram now with the transients, we even see that, because usually one plots the bifurcation diagram after a long time scale, so that all the transients have already disappeared, and we see clearly our attractors. Now we abandon this plot and say, oh, we plot also our transients, and then we see that there are lots of chaotic transients here, and this is what we see in a time-dependent solution. So the time-dependent dynamics, when we change our parameter in time and the time scale is comparable with what the internal dynamics is, so the dissipative time scale, we don't see what is in the bifurcation diagram. This is completely overlaid. So with the chaotic dynamics, which is in the long times, so if I would take it with long trends, very slow trends, so then so we would not see the saddle, we would see the attractors, but now this kind of chaotic saddle becomes the attractor in the time-dependent manner, and no bifurcation tipping is occurred. And that means this switch-off rate has to be very, very much smaller than the dissipation rate, only then. So this quasi-stationary viewpoint is possible. If this is not the case, so we see other relations between which are also taking place. It's not only the dissipation rate, so to say, which is important, but it's also the escape rate from the chaotic saddle. So this will be discussed tomorrow. And so here I am with my summary. So for today, we have learned about 4 different types of critical transitions. So I would call the first 3, bifurcation, noise-induced, and shock-induced, as the classical ones, because they have been studied for a very long time. But the rate-induced is really something new. And it brings us into the world of non-autonomous dynamics, where we have to look at really, so to say, time scales. So different time scales play a role. The time scale, the dissipative time scale, of course, the time scale of the driver, and the time scale under certain conditions, also the time scale of the chaotic saddle, which is not even mentioned here. But this time scale separation is something which is very important and which will determine, so to say, many of these critical transitions. And we have also learned that these rate-induced transitions depend crucially on the initial condition. And so then what we have also learned, instead of attractors, so the stable states, the saddles are of equal importance. And we have really to deal with saddle points, with their stable and unstable manifolds, to understand what critical transitions is. And this is what we are going to continue. So I thought that we will do questions and answers, so to say, so you can think about what I have I have presented here. So we will have a question and answer session in the hands-on part, and furthermore, so we will look at what are the consequences of some of the timescale separation in neuroscience for some of these transitions when we look at neurons. And this is for today. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Okay. Any questions? Yeah, Mario. Here.
Thanks. Thanks, Ulrike, for this very, very clear and pedagogical introduction to this topic. My question is more a curiosity is about the slow-fast systems. I would like to know if is there any condition imposed to the relationship between the slow and the fast components. What happens? Do you know if there is something particular that happens, for instance, if the fast is half of the slow motion? So is there any kind of particular phenomenon observed in this kind of, because for the doubling period, for instance, or I don't know, because in neuroscience, it's very common sometimes where the fast rhythms is twice the slow rhythm. So I wonder if this can have an effect on the dynamics.
I think this is a very nice question, but I don't have an answer for it. So because what we saw, at least in the ecological systems, so we have really varied the timescale separation. And then it turns out that it doesn't matter too much. But on the other hand, so to say, there is a huge difference between the neuroscience and the ecological models. Because here, so we are usually dealing with critical transitions from stationary states. And in neuroscience, we have a periodic solution. That means this has also an eigenfrequency. And this eigenfrequency is another timescale which plays a role. And so this will change the whole game, I would say. So because this can very well be so that this timescale, so what is basically your original frequency if you think about not an excitable neuron but an oscillatory neuron, then this plays for sure a role, I would bet, even though I don't know what is really doing, because there are only a very few people who really think even in terms of rate-induced transitions to apply this basically to neuroscience. But I think it calls for it because it's obvious that so one can do it. So I mean, therefore I thought it's a good idea we check it once. So whether it is like this, but I would guess then this type of questions comes immediately on the table.
Thank you, Ulrike.
Yeah.
Any other question? Sorry. Any other question? Yeah. I can speak. Wait a second, because I have some difficulty.
Know if the Lyapunov exponent can help you to evaluate Okay. I want to know if we could use the Lyapunov exponent to evaluate the resilience of a system to the perturbation.
So it depends on what type of transitions you consider. So here, since we have looked only at stationary solutions, as I just answered for the previous question, so Lyapunov exponents are not very useful because we can just compute the eigenvalues and we are done, basically. So, but of course, so when we come to tomorrow, so to the transitions, so which are relevant, say, for networks and networks of neurons, then, of course, Lyapunov exponents are very helpful. So, and then they really come into play, but I have to shift this to tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay, any other question? Gracias. So who wanted to ask? Any other? Okay. Well, then we, If we don't have any other questions, we go to coffee and we'll be back in half an hour. Thank you.